各位观众，大家好，我是卡拉，欢迎收看《美国观察》。美国国会议员访问团在台北会晤台湾总统蔡英文，此举引发中国解放军军演作为报复。另外，塔利班夺取政权1周年，目前阿富汗人道灾难持续不断。今天的节目中，我们共同关注。乌克兰军方星期一报告说，俄罗斯军队进行了猛烈的炮击，至少有3名乌克兰平民被打死，20名平民受伤。在东部的顿涅茨克地区有3人死亡，13人受伤。几个星期来，顿巴斯地区一直激战不断。自从星期日以来，俄军把打击目标对准诸多城镇和村庄，击中了几十座居民楼。俄军也炮击了哈尔科夫的居民楼和一处巴士车站附近地段。乌克兰方面的说法无法得到核实，但是俄罗斯国防部说，俄军击中了哈尔科夫的一处军事设施，打死了至少100名来自波兰和德国的雇佣军，还打伤了50人。与此同时，乌军表示，过去1个星期以来，摧毁了10多座俄罗斯存放弹药和军事设备的仓库。扎波罗热核电站周围的局势依然紧张，俄罗斯和乌克兰继续指责对方在该设施附近开火。美国参议院外交委员会亚太小组主席马基参议员率领跨党派议员访问台湾，引发中国方面的抗议。白宫国安会告诉美国之音，这符合美国的一中政策。美国国会议员将继续访问台湾。详细情况，请美国之音白宫记者黄耀义来介绍。耀义。
是美国国会参议院外交委员会的亚太小组主席马基参议员，民主党的参议员呢，率领了一个跨党派的参众两院的议员，在8月14号以及15号访问台湾。那么之后呢，中国就对此表示抗议，并且在15号开始在台海周遭继续举办了军事演习。而中国外交部的发言人汪文斌更是批评美国妄图挑战一个中国原则。那美国之音就在8月15号询问了白宫国安会对相关事件的回应。对此呢，一位白宫国安会的发言人告诉我说，美国国会议员过去数十年来一直有造访台湾，以后也将持续造访，这符合我们长久以来的一个中国政策。而关于国会议员的相关行程呢，国安会则告诉我说，要直接与代表团来做联系。而在马基参议员率领的代表团离开台湾之后呢，中国已经在15号开始在台海周遭举办了军事演习。而中国国台办的发言人马晓光则是批评美国是蓄意破坏台海和平稳定。不过呢，美国国务院发言人普莱斯在8月15号的记者会上则是表示，今天在侵蚀并且试图改变维持和平稳定的海峡两岸现状的不是美国，也不是台湾，而是中国。他并且也表示呢，美国并不会因此而受到吓阻。我们看一下普莱斯今天怎么说。
With its recent provocative and totally unnecessary response to the congressional delegation that visited Taiwan earlier this month, has again demonstrated that its willingness to challenge that status quo. That we won't be deterred from flying, from sailing, from operating in the region in accordance with international law. And that's why President Biden directed, as you heard on Friday, the USS Ronald Reagan to remain on station longer and announced that additional steps would be forthcoming in our support for Taiwan.
而普莱斯也强调呢，美国国会议员们对台湾所进行的和平访问，中国所做出的挑衅以及军事的行动，都是过度反应。卡拉。
好的，感谢耀义从白宫带来的报道。保护记者委员会星期一要求中国当局立即释放报道唐山打人事件的记者毛慧斌，撤销对他的所有指控，并允许媒体自由报道社会议题。根据毛慧斌的夫人王慧娣对保护记者委员会提供的消息以及新闻报道，毛慧斌8月9日10点在衡水市的家中被捕。毛慧斌是向中国微信独立博客慧慧营养师和慧慧人间提供健康和社会新闻的自由记者。他7月17日在贴文询问唐山6月烧烤店打人事件的受害人的下落。他7月18日张贴了一段唐山打人事件的视频。保护记者委员会的记录显示，6月后前往唐山报道打人事件的记者都遭到当地政府的阻碍，包括被唐山警方骚扰和拘留。 美国国防部长奥斯汀星期一说，他的新冠病毒检测结果为阳性，这是今年的第2次。目前他有轻度症状。奥斯汀在声明中说，他将按照疾控中心的指导原则，在今后5天里居家隔离，并维持所有职权，在家中以网络方式继续按照正常的日程安排工作。69岁的奥斯汀今年1月也曾感染新冠病毒，他敦促所有美国人接种疫苗。人权活动家图凯尔是第一位美国教育培养出的维吾尔律师。最近他推出回忆录《无处可逃》，以他的个人生平和其他维吾尔人的故事，讲述维吾尔人在中共治下的处境，揭露中共在新疆实施的大规模监禁和以高科技手段强化的种族灭绝政策。
Nuri, you were born in a detention center in Kashgar during the Cultural Revolution. Right. What kind of good and bad memories do you have when you grew up in Xinjiang?
I was born in a re-education camp during the height of the Cultural Revolution in Kashgar, in a ancient city where the Uyghur people considered the cradle of Uyghur civilization. Because of the extraordinarily difficult circumstances that I was brought to this world and the physical existence of that camp, that building, Soviet-style building that I walked by with my mom and with my friends, always reminded of the brutal environment that my mother went through, physical and emotional torture. To make the matter worse, during that time, my father was sent to labor camp in an area 3 hours away from Kashgar. So after hearing them, newly wedded couple, forcibly separated, and went through that kind of a painful experience, affected me profoundly. So my concern, critical view of the Chinese Communist Party started way early. Of course, you cannot have a public, free conversation about your views about the regime openly, but I knew that something did not really settle with me from my childhood years. On a positive aspect, because the city where I was born and raised is very cultural and very communal in a sense. There were plenty of activities for me as I grew up to maintain my Uyghurness. Music, sports activities, literature, arts, food, and also religious ceremonies. I grew up in the 1980s where the Chinese Communist Party was not as brutal as today. So there was some room for the breathing room for Uyghurs to be able to, just to be Uyghur. Even in my instance, as I describe in the book, I was even able to participate in some religious activities, following my father to attend Friday prayers, public prayers at major holidays. So I have both regretful memories in my early childhood period, and also quite happy adolescence years in Kashgar.
You left China after college graduation. During that time, it was Jiang Zemin as China's leader at the time. What did you see the major problems in Beijing's policy towards Uyghurs at that time? And what kind of major things has Xi Jinping done greatly that worsens the situation in Xinjiang?
During my college years, after college, this was coincided with the end of the Cold War. And this is the time that the Communist Party starts spelling out their sense of insecurity. They wanted to have so-called Shahui Wending, social stability. But they missed the key aspect of achieving that stability through liberalization, leaving people alone, less interference in people's lives, spiritual life, personal life, economic activities, education, then naturally will get you that stability. But Chinese Communist Party to this day does not get it. Why China spends more money on domestic security than the national defense actually explains that this government is inherently fearful of its own people, its own population. So that's how this thing started. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, China's leadership promised it's not going to happen to us. How do you prevent this? No political upheaval. How do you prevent political upheaval? Political repression. So, and now that turned into a genocidal act. So it's just backfiring one after one and created enormous backlash. So at the end of the day, ultimately, because of this short-sighted, brutal policy initiatives and implementations by the Communist Party, eventually the Chinese people on the ground will pay, at least reputationally. Now, when you talk about genocide in China, every Chinese people should be concerned because that's the country that they're affiliated with. And I always wonder if those reasonable, fair-minded Chinese citizens, either under Jiang Zemin or Xi Jinping, know that their country, their government is operating the largest incarceration of ethno-religious minority group since the Holocaust. Do they know that this is the government that is using technology to intensify, enable the ongoing genocide? Do they know that alleviating somebody from poverty is not a human right? So there are a lot of things that the Chinese people don't know, and the Chinese people should be made aware of that this is a Communist Party is an evil regime, that serving the interest of the Chinese people in the short and the long term.
For the recent secretaries in Xinjiang, from Wang Enmao, Song Hanliang, Wang Lequan, Zhang Chunxian, and Chen Quanguo, is it meaningful to differentiate one from another, and who may be like the worst secretaries?
I would say without hesitation, Chen Quanguo turned out to be the worst one. Chinese policy analysts, or China policy analysts, China watchers, experts, historians likening him to Adolf Eichmann, Hitler's final solution guy. So Chen Quanguo is extremely brutal. If you look at his secretive life, the way that he built his career, he's a military guy. He never talks about his personal life, and deeply insecure, deeply brutal. Just if you look at the way that he treats children, that in of itself shows how brutal that this person is. And he's single-handedly picked by Xi Jinping and enabled and given all the resources, political position, even in the Politburo, which is very unusual for provincial level official to be in. So he had given the green light, authority, resources, justification, you name it. So I don't think that anyone surpasses him.
And also, like, what about the current one, Ma Xingrui?
And as for Ma Xingrui, he's essentially there for damage control. The damage is already done by Chen. The genocide is still underway. None of the policies have been reversed. The camps are still in operations. The government is still in denial on a justification or in a business of confusing the international community by conflating something so obvious. So Ma Xingrui now trying to, not only the damage control through his sort of moderate look, a background from the coastal city, but also he's trying to revive the Xinjiang economy. Because with sanctions announced by the United States government targeting Xinjiang Jianshou Bingtuan, the Xinjiang Construction Protection, XPCC, Xinjiang Production Construction Corps, hurt the local economy. It's a paramilitary with close to 3 million troops. So Ma Xingrui has a very, very specific agenda, which I believe, based on what I read, is to control the narrative, project less repressive image of a leadership, and also try to help the local economy.
In your book, you also talk about some of the technologies the Chinese government used in those detention camps right now. And some of the technologies are stolen from the Silicon Valley. Could you tell us more about that?
You know, it's inevitable. The Chinese people are hardworking, innovative, in many aspects in technology sphere, forward-looking. So it's inevitable that China have an advanced technology. But the question is that technology making lives better, more secure, more prosperous? Or is that technology enabling the government to be more intrusive? And I don't think that any Chinese citizen, in a broader sense, like the Chinese government monitoring spousal activities in their bedrooms, spousal communications in the bedroom, family communications in the bedroom, because every single mobile device in China is a listening device now. So China is a new Saudi Arabia for personal data. In the case of Uyghurs, it's more than just a surveillance. They're using the personal data to identify those who need to go to the concentration camp. IJOP is the acronym for Integrated Joint Operating Platform. In Chinese, it's Yitihua Xitong, has been used to collect personal data and use machine to order who should be sent to the camp for re-education. So if this does not concern us in the United States, if it does not concern any ordinary Chinese in China, then I think we have a problem. This should concern every one of us. Technology is supposed to foster your life. Technology, I live in a technology. I take advantage of and benefit from technology, but I'm equally concerned and disturbed that the engineers in Silicon Valley, venture capitalists in Silicon Valley, hedge funds in New York still funding the Chinese technology. Silicon Valley is still supporting the Chinese high tech. That is directly connected to the central government. Central government is essentially共产党, Central Chinese Communist Party. This is not a normal government. This is a one-party Communist Party ruled country. It's economic policies, tech policies, the national defense, law enforcement, the legal, everything is set. Even social media messaging is set by the Communist Party. So people need to know this is not about calling China out. This is not about reporting on something that already become a part of the Chinese people's lives. This is about the future. Do you really want to have Chinese form of governance and social control, people control, or you want to have a more liberalized society that respects your privacy?
China's brutal oppression in the labor camps in Xinjiang has caught the attention of the whole world. What could be done to get more details about the brutalities in Xinjiang?
The international community is still concerned, both in governmental level, in the societal level, in the business level, potential retaliation. I think that's a wrong approach. China will not have a healthy, mutually respectful relationship as long as it continues to genocide. It's the end of the story. Anyone in Beijing advising Xi Jinping or advising senior policymakers are not being honest. The fact that the international community turned against China, and I never seen, I don't know if you have, in my recent memory, as isolated as China has been in the international community. And they do care how it's perceived, how it's portrayed. And they do care when their economic interest is hurt. So because of this disastrous policies, committing genocide in the broad daylight, on world's watch, committing crimes against humanity, with ill intention to destroy this nation, this proud people, ethno-religious group. Now China puts itself in a box. Can you imagine that if these things didn't happen, where the China could be today? What is China's economy would look like, and how China's economy would look like? So they have managed to shoot on their own foot. This is their own problem. This is own sense of insecurity imposed on other people, thinking that they could get away with it with impunity. World is changing.
The Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act is implemented starting this June. How do you see the effect of the act preventing the forced labor in Xinjiang?
The Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, arguably the most important thing that the U.S. Congress has done since China joined the WTO to address some of the lingering issues. Slave labor products coming to the United States is already banned. There's a certain measures put in place, but because of the scope and severity of the issues that we're dealing with, specifically on forced labor practice in China, because of the labor shortage, it has become such a huge issue affecting everybody's life, and even in the United States and worldwide. So this bill will address this. And then the brilliance of this bill is to push the responsibility to the businesses, essentially saying that everything that you bring into the United States are made by or made with forced labor. We will not let you import unless you prove otherwise. So instead of governments doing investigation, putting a lot of resources, this is on the businesses, rightfully. And also this will make some business practices difficult. It may affect the supply chain because American people were addicted to cheap consumer products that they find in Costco, Target, and Walmart. They may no longer be the case. There's an ethical way to do business, and money is not everything. There's a human lives, and anyone should even feel comfortable with modern day slavery should be ashamed of himself or herself. We should despise anyone being enslaved or performed forced labor against their will, here at home, around the world, China. No matter where it finds, we should all condemn it. It's cruel, inhumane. China is not the only place that they can make those products. They can go to a country that does not enslave fellow human being. We already have a supply chain problem. Look, remember the ventilator problem early on in the early parts of the pandemic? The Americans did not make enough ventilators. It was imported from China. And guess what? A lot of people died. So American people need to make things at home. And American people are capable of making things at home. And China should not be the only country for assembly lines. There's a lot of places in the developing world who would be happy to host those companies.
欢迎继续收看《美国观察》。塔利班在从阿富汗政府手中夺回权力1周年之际，宣布星期一为全国性节日。但自从重新掌权以来，纯男性的政府大幅削减了妇女的工作和教育权，并且限制了公民自由。来看美国之音驻巴基斯坦和阿富汗记者站主任坦奇姆的报道。
I'm reporting from Islamabad, Pakistan, because Taliban have not given me a visa to go to Afghanistan, even though I applied a month ago. But last year I was in Kabul on the day Taliban entered the city, and I saw widespread panic and fear. A year later, that panic and fear has subsided, but a lot of other problems have arisen, especially a humanitarian disaster. The United Nations says half of the country's population is severely food insecure. Children are becoming malnourished. Similarly, when it comes to human rights, especially women's rights and press freedom, the situation is really bad. Taliban are cracking down on local journalists, and they have increased their crackdown on foreign media. They have broken their promise of allowing women to go to school, so middle school girls, most of them have not attended school in the last 1 year. When it comes to security, it has improved in the country because the violence, the war has subsided, so NGOs and human rights groups have more access now. And since the Taliban have not received recognition from any other country in the world, and they're mostly isolated by the US and Europe. It has allowed China to play a bigger role in the country. China has two concerns that they want the Taliban to address. Their biggest concern is the Uyghurs from Xinjiang province that during the Taliban's previous regime used to find safe havens in Afghanistan. The Taliban want to, the Chinese want to make sure that they have enough of a relationship with the Taliban that the Taliban address their security concerns. That is why China is providing humanitarian aid to Taliban. That is not the only reason, but that is one of the biggest reasons. And China is also trying to develop regional connectivity through Afghanistan. They are signing MOUs with the Taliban. They're promising to finance a railway line that goes through Afghanistan. So it serves both purposes. It allows them more regional connectivity. It gives them more of a leverage over Taliban, and it answers some of their security concerns. So there are some indications that the Taliban have moved Uyghurs from Badakhshan, which was literally on the border of China, to other parts of Afghanistan. And we saw that Uyghurs are not so openly showing in their videos their training camps or their people in Afghanistan. So there's indication that the Taliban are cognizant and are addressing some of Chinese security concerns. From Islamabad, Pakistan, Aisha Tanseem, VOA News.
自从俄罗斯的军队入侵乌克兰以来，在乌克兰反侵略的前线部队中有不少女性的身影，她们和男性一样冲锋陷阵，为保卫国土而战。
Моральний бойовий дух в наших військовослужбовців на високому рівні зараз. Але всі хочуть побувати в своїх домівках, побачити своїх рідних, близьких. Зараз над цим працюємо. Зараз в процесі. На мою думку, так. З жінкою вони більш відкриваються і розповідають тобі те таємне, що вони не можуть відповісти чоловікові. Навіть своїм рідним. Їм краще виговоритись чужій людині, ніж свої. Тому що стан пригнічений і потрібно якось виходити з цього. Важко.
Командир машины командует, оператор-наводчик работает с пушкой, ну а я, конечно, за штурвалом. Тяжело за особовый склад, тяжело думать, когда все на позициях. Каждый приход, вот это тяжело, да. Думаю, что главное, чтобы в кого-то не попало, не за 200. Вот это самое тяжелое. Ну, со своей стороны я стараюсь тоже помогать по максимуму. И психологически, и так. Любая работа, которая там нужна, делаем. Независимо, женщина я или нет.
以上就是今天美国观察的全部内容，感谢您的收看，我们明天再见。